I've always been drawn to forgotten places, the kind of towns that don't show up on maps but carry stories stronger than any city skyline. As I wandered through these hidden corners of upstate New York, I couldn't believe what I discovered: streets where laughter once echoed, now silent, homes abandoned, yet full of secrets. In towns like Jayville and Doodletown, I found moments that made my heart race, details so strange, so unexpected, that I knew almost no one had ever noticed them. What I'm about to show you isn't just history, it's hidden life, quietly waiting to be remembered. If you love uncovering hidden stories like this, hit that subscribe button and join me on every adventure. 1. Tahoe, Essex County. I first heard about Tahoe from a local historian while I was driving through the winding roads of Essex County. He spoke in a hushed tone, almost as if the trees themselves might be listening. "It's a place that time forgot," he said. I didn't know what to expect, but as soon as I turned off the main road onto the narrow path leading up the mountain, I realized he wasn't exaggerating. The air felt heavier here, colder, and the silence was almost deafening. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to remember it. Walking through Tahoe, I could see the remnants of its past life. Old brick buildings stood cracked and weathered, roofs partially caved in, windows shattered. I imagined miners once bustling through these streets, carrying heavy loads of iron ore, their boots echoing on wooden floors. You could almost hear the rhythm of their work in the silence, a ghostly pulse of a life that had vanished decades ago. The streets that now seemed so empty must have been alive with laughter, shouting, and the everyday chaos of a small town built for a purpose. I found myself pausing at the remains of what looked like an old general store. The faded signage barely readable, peeling paint revealing decades of neglect. I thought about the families who depended on this store, buying groceries, chatting with neighbors, children running along the streets after school. And then, just like that, everything was gone. The mine closed, jobs vanished, and slowly the people left, carrying with them memories and small pieces of their lives. Standing there, I felt a deep sadness. It wasn't just the buildings that were abandoned, it was an entire way of life that had quietly disappeared. As I explored deeper, I stumbled upon a small cemetery tucked between the hills. Simple stones, some leaning, some broken, names almost erased. I could sense the stories behind each marker, families who had lived and died here, generations who had worked hard only to see their town vanish. One name, etched into a lopsided stone, made me pause. I wondered what dreams that person had, what they had hoped for, and how they must have felt watching the town empty around them. It made me think about the fragility of human endeavors, how quickly life can change when the foundations, like a mine in Tahoe, collapse. I spent hours wandering, taking photos, making mental notes. There was a strange beauty in the decay, a raw honesty. Tahoe didn't try to hide its history, it wore it openly, scars and all. And as I drove away that evening, the sun dipping behind the mountains, I realized something important. The town might be forgotten by most people, but for those who come here, listen carefully, and pay attention, it tells a story more powerful than any modern city ever could. It's a story of hard work, loss, resilience, and memory, and it lingers in the air long after the last person has left. 2 Lion Mountain, Clinton County. I arrived at Lion Mountain on a crisp morning, the air carrying a sharp bite that made me pull my jacket tighter. From the moment I turned off the main highway and started climbing the winding roads, I could feel a sense of history pressing down on me. It was quiet, too quiet, and the silence seemed to stretch endlessly over the rolling hills and the sparse, scattered houses. You could tell this was a town that had once thrived but had been left behind by time. Walking through the streets, I noticed the old mine buildings looming in the distance, their brick walls weathered and cracked, like tired giants who had seen too much. Lion Mountain had been built around iron ore, and the mine had shaped every aspect of life here. Families depended on it for survival, the rhythm of their days was set by the shifts, the sound of machinery, the call of the foreman. But when the mine closed in 1967, that rhythm stopped. The town seemed to exhale a long, sorrowful sigh, and slowly, house by house, family by family, people began to leave. I paused outside a once lively home with peeling white paint and windows darkened by years of neglect. I imagined children running along the narrow paths, playing hide-and-seek while their parents worked long hours in the mines. I could almost hear their laughter, faint echoes trapped in the walls, refusing to leave even as the family moved on. Standing there, I felt a pang of sadness. This wasn't just the loss of buildings, it was the loss of life, of stories, of daily routines that gave this place meaning. Every empty house seemed to whisper the same question: what happens to a community when its heartbeat disappears? As I wandered deeper into the town, I came across the old town hall, its doors hanging loosely on rusted hinges. The place where people once gathered for meetings, dances, and celebrations now sat in a stillness that was almost reverent. I thought about the miners who walked those streets, their hopes tied to the iron beneath the ground. Some stayed after the mine closed, clinging to memories, while others packed their lives into trucks and left, seeking work and opportunity elsewhere. The mix of courage and desperation hung in the air like a fog I couldn't shake. Towards the edge of town, I discovered the small cemetery, its stones leaning and cracked with age. The names etched into the markers told stories of people who had lived, loved, and worked here for generations. I stood silently for a while, thinking about the generations whose lives were intertwined with this mountain, and how quickly it all could unravel when the foundation, the mine, the lifeline, was taken away. Walking back down the hill as the sun dipped behind the peaks, I felt a strange mixture of awe and melancholy. Lion Mountain might be quiet now, almost forgotten by the world, but the echoes of its past, the laughter, the work, the human spirit, remain. And as I drove away, leaving the empty streets and silent structures behind, I realized that the true story of Lion Mountain isn't just in the ruins, it's in the lives of the people who once called it home, in the memories they carried away, and in the lessons that a community's rise and fall can teach anyone willing to listen. 3 Jayville, St. Lawrence County. I first reached Jayville on a quiet autumn afternoon. The road leading into the town was narrow and overgrown, the trees arching above like they were trying to block out the world beyond. As I stepped out of the car, a chill ran down my spine, not because of the cold, but because of the weight of history pressing down on me. This place had once been alive, thriving on the lumber industry, but now it felt like a secret that no one wanted to remember. But now it felt like a secret that no one wanted to remember. Point 4. Walking through the few remaining streets, I could see how the forest had begun reclaiming the town. Wooden homes leaned at odd angles, paint long faded, porches sagging under the weight of years without care. I imagined families once bustling here, children running barefoot along these paths, men and women carrying logs, sweat and determination on their faces. Now, the silence was absolute, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird. It felt wrong to be alone in a place that had once been full of life. I paused outside what had probably been the general store. Its windows were shattered, and inside, shelves were empty, dust covering everything like a thick blanket. I wondered what it must have been like when the store was busy, with neighbors exchanging news, gossip, and laughter. Every object left behind told a story, every crack in the walls a reminder of the life that had once thrived here. The thought hit me that this wasn't just a town fading, this was an entire way of life disappearing piece by piece, carried away by time and necessity. As I explored further, I came across the remains of an old railway track at the edge of town. It was easy to imagine trains once arriving, heavy with timber, people waving to friends and family as cargo was loaded and unloaded. That track had connected Jayville to the outside world, and when it fell into disuse, the town slowly cut itself off. People left, moving to cities where work was plentiful, leaving behind empty homes and memories that only the wind seemed to carry. I finally found a small, unmarked cemetery tucked behind a grove of trees. The stones were cracked and leaning, names barely legible. I stood silently, thinking of the generations who had lived, worked, and died here. I tried to picture the laughter, the arguments, the celebrations that had once filled this place. And then I felt the heartbreak of watching a community slowly vanish, its people forced to leave their roots behind. As I drove away that evening, the sun sinking behind the hills, I felt a mixture of awe and sorrow. Jayville was gone in body but not in spirit. Every broken window, every leaning home, every tree reclaiming the street told a story of resilience, struggle, and the unstoppable march of time. The town might be forgotten on maps, but for those willing to come and listen, it speaks louder than any bustling city ever could. For Doodletown, Rockland County. I had heard about Doodletown from an old park ranger who spoke of it like it was a ghost hiding in plain sight. Driving into the area, I didn't expect the sense of loss to hit me so sharply. The winding roads led through dense forests, the kind that swallow sound, leaving only the crunch of my boots on gravel. As I stepped out of the car, I could feel the weight of the town's history pressing down on me. It was quiet, almost painfully so, as if the very air remembered the families that had lived here and now mourned their absence. Walking along what remained of the main street, I could see the foundations of homes barely holding together, stones and bricks covered in moss. I imagined children running along these paths, their laughter echoing off the hills, neighbors exchanging greetings as they passed by. Every structure had a story etched into it, a silent testament to the lives that once filled them. But the stories stopped abruptly when the government acquired the land, and families were forced to leave. It was strange to think that decisions made far away could erase entire communities, leaving only the shells of their past lives behind. I wandered past the old schoolhouse, its windows shattered, doors ajar. I could almost hear the faint echoes of lessons, of footsteps running across wooden floors during recess. It made me think of the teachers who must have worked tirelessly. Students who dreamed of the world beyond these hills, and the families who tried to keep a sense of normalcy despite the looming uncertainty. Standing there, I felt a deep sadness for the invisible threads that once held this community together, threads now severed by circumstances beyond their control. The small cemetery at the edge of town caught my attention next. The gravestones were leaning, many names faded with time. I could sense the stories of generations, the hardships they faced, the quiet moments of happiness, and the grief that must have been part of their lives. I paused there, reflecting on how fleeting human presence can be. One moment, the town was vibrant, alive, filled with routines and memories. The next, it was overgrown and silent, nature slowly reclaiming what was once human-made. As I walked back to my car, the sun was dipping behind the hills, casting long shadows across the empty streets. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, wrapping the town in a quiet embrace. I realized that Doodletown's story wasn't just about abandonment, it was about resilience, memory, and the traces we leave behind. Even in absence, the town spoke loudly, telling anyone who would listen about the lives once lived here, the dreams once nurtured, and the fragility of communities when history turns its tide. Driving away, I felt a strange connection to this forgotten place. Doodletown might be absent from maps and conversations, but the echo of its people's lives lingers in the air, in the rustle of leaves, and in the silent strength of the hills that hold their stories. 5 Nahasane, St. Lawrence County. I had been driving for hours through the dense forests of St. Lawrence County when I finally spotted the faint outline of Nahasane. The road was barely visible, cracked and covered with fallen leaves, and it felt like I was entering a place that time itself had forgotten. As I stepped out of my car, the smell of damp earth mixed with the crisp autumn air. And I could hear the soft rustle of the trees above. It was quiet in a way that made every sound feel amplified, the distant caw of a crow, my own footsteps echoing against the empty streets. The first thing I noticed were the houses, standing stoically but clearly abandoned. The wooden siding peeled from decades of neglect, windows darkened with dust, and some roofs had partially caved in. I imagined the families that had once lived here, their lives intertwined with the town's pulse. Children running to school, neighbors greeting one another, the soft chatter drifting from porches. And then, almost imperceptibly, that life had vanished. Jobs tied to the local railroad and logging operations had disappeared, and slowly, one by one, the families left, carrying their memories and hopes elsewhere. Walking further, I came across what looked like the remains of a small shop, its doors hanging loosely on rusted hinges. I could almost see the old shopkeeper, stocking shelves, chatting with townsfolk who had walked these streets for generations. The thought made me pause. Every broken window, every shattered fence seemed to carry the echoes of conversations and laughter that could never return. It was heartbreaking to witness how quickly human life could disappear, leaving behind only the silent bones of a community. The cemetery at the edge of town drew me in next. The stones leaned precariously, many of the names barely readable after decades of weather. I ran my fingers lightly over the engravings, imagining the stories behind each name. I thought of the miners, the loggers, their families, and the simple lives they lived, hard work, celebrations, grief, and hope. And now, they were gone, leaving the land to reclaim itself. It struck me that Nahasane wasn't just a town. It was a collection of lives and dreams that had slowly unraveled when opportunity vanished. As I walked back along the cracked road, the sun began its slow descent behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the empty landscape. The forest seemed to swallow the town further, as if protecting its secrets. I realized that Nahasane's story was not one of ghostly whispers or fantastical horror, it was a story of reality, of human perseverance, and of quiet disappearance. Even in its emptiness, it had a presence that left a mark on anyone who visited, a reminder that life can vanish as quietly as it appears, but the memory lingers if one takes the time to notice. Driving away, I felt a deep sense of respect and melancholy. Nahasane might not appear on most maps anymore, and its streets may never echo with human voices again, but its story, the toil, the loss, and the endurance of its people remained vivid in the air, waiting for someone to see, to listen, and to remember. 6 Tahowas, Upper Works Area, Essex County. I arrived at the Upper Works area of Tahowas on a chilly morning, the mist hanging low over the mountains. The road leading up was barely more than a dirt path, lined with towering trees that whispered with the wind. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I felt the quiet settle around me, almost heavy, like the place was holding its breath. I could imagine the miners who once worked here, starting their day before sunrise, carrying the weight of iron ore and responsibility, never knowing that one day the mine itself would turn against the town. Walking through the ruins, I could see the remnants of old buildings scattered across the slope, foundations, broken walls, rusted machinery left to decay. I paused at what used to be a small workers' barrack. The wood was cracked, nails sticking out, the windows long gone. I imagined families living in these small quarters, children playing outside, laughter echoing across the valley. The silence now was so absolute that it almost hurt, a stark reminder that the life that once filled this place had been quietly erased. I wandered further up, noticing the rusted tracks where the ore carts must have traveled decades ago. Homes were abandoned, shops closed, and families left carrying memories instead of livelihoods. Every step I took felt like tracing the ghosts of those who had once made this place hum with energy. At the edge of the clearing, I discovered a small graveyard, stones leaning and names barely readable. I ran my fingers over the etched letters, thinking of the miners, their families, and the simple joys and struggles of life here. The people who had poured their sweat into the mountains, who had dreamed of a future in this harsh land, were gone, yet their presence lingered in every cracked board and rusted hinge. I could almost feel their determination and exhaustion mingling with the damp morning air. As I turned to leave, the sun began to rise over the peaks, casting long shadows across the abandoned landscape. I realized Tahowas Upper Works wasn't just a forgotten town. It was a story of ambition, resilience, and quiet defeat. The mountains held the memories of those who had lived and worked here, and even though the buildings were crumbling, the human spirit that had animated the town still seemed to whisper through the air. Driving away, I carried a strange mix of awe and sadness. The place might be empty, but its story, the sweat, the dreams, the loss, remains alive for anyone willing to see it. 7 Pottersville, Old Hamlet Area, Warren County. I first stumbled upon Pottersville on a foggy morning, the kind of fog that draped itself over the hills like a thick blanket. The main road was cracked and uneven, lined with trees whose branches reached across, almost like they were holding the town in a quiet embrace. As I stepped out of my car, I could feel the stillness pressing down on me. It wasn't just silence, it was a weight, the kind that tells you something once lived here, something full of life, and now it was gone. The first thing that caught my eye were the old houses, spaced unevenly along the old paths. Some still had slanted roofs and boarded windows, others were only foundations, slowly giving way to weeds and grass. I imagined families here, children running along these streets, neighbors calling out to one another, small shops bustling with life. And then, just as suddenly as it had existed, it all disappeared. Economic decline hit hard, young people left for cities, and slowly, the town's heartbeat faltered. Every abandoned porch, every rusted sign felt like a story paused mid-sentence, never to continue. I wandered down to what appeared to be an old store, its windows shattered and shelves long empty. I could almost picture the shopkeeper arranging cans, greeting locals as they passed, sharing gossip and laughter that now only seemed to linger in the air. I paused, running my fingers over the weathered wood, thinking about how everyday life, so simple, so routine, can vanish when opportunities disappear. It was heartbreaking to think that a place once full of life could be reduced to quiet ruins in just a few decades. Walking further, I noticed remnants of a small bridge over a creek, rusted and worn, yet still standing. I could almost hear the sounds of carts crossing it, children splashing in the water nearby, the hum of people going about their daily lives. Now, the creek gurgled alone, flowing beneath the bridge like it had always known it would outlast the town itself. The thought struck me hard, nature always remains patient, but human lives are fragile, fleeting, and easily swept aside. At the edge of the area, I came across a tiny cemetery. The stones leaned, names fading with time, some barely legible. I imagined the lives behind each stone, the struggles, the celebrations, the hopes, the disappointments. This small patch of land was a testament to generations who had called Pottersville home, whose presence had shaped this place and whose absence left it suspended in memory. Standing there, I felt both awe and sorrow. Pottersville might be empty, but it was alive in its stories, in the echoes of its past, and in the silent lessons it offers to anyone willing to listen. Driving away as the sun dipped behind the hills, I glanced back at the town one last time. The streets were empty, the houses quiet, but the spirit of the people who once lived here lingered in the wind, in the trees, and in the way the land itself seemed to remember every laugh, every hardship, every quiet moment of life. Pottersville might not appear on most maps, but for those who come to see, it speaks louder than any modern city ever could.